Hello, my name is Mike and this is Guns and Horsepower. Thank you for joining me for today's video where I discuss and show you just exactly what is different about a 1993 Ford Mustang COBRA. For those of you that aren't familiar with the COBRA model, it was produced by Ford's Special Vehicles Team, or SVT, and it came out about mid-year in 1993, and it represents the pinnacle of Fox body development and performance. At the time, this was the fastest Mustang produced up until that date. But there's a little bit of controversy associated with the car, especially the horsepower and torque numbers that were published. They definitely don't represent the power that this car puts out. And I want to explain to you why those numbers aren't accurate and to give you a more accurate account of the actual power that this car produces. I refer to it in one of my other videos as a torque monster, and it indeed is that. But if you go off the numbers that the internet gives you, you're not going to agree with that very much. The numbers are artificially low, and I'll explain why that is. But first, let's get started by going over the car and showing you what's different on the outside, and then especially what's different in the performance department. So starting off at the front of the car, on the regular 5-liter Mustang, this is a closed off and it has the Ford Blue Oval. Well, for the COBRA, they needed a little bit more cooling, so they opened up the grille and put the running horse on the front. Next is the 17-inch wheels. I believe they're 17 by 7.5, so an inch wider than the standard Mustang rim, and the first time that 17-inch rims came on any Ford product. A little side note, the brake rotors are the same diameter as a stock 5-liter, but because of the wider rim, they have a different offset. So if you were to put standard 5-liter rotors on here, the tires will rub on the A-arms. Moving along the side, the 5-liter badge was dropped in favor of the COBRA emblems, and also the side skirts are different. They're not like the GT side skirts that have like a little opening in the back. A little bit more minimalistic style on the side skirts. Now moving on to the back, the biggest difference, of course, is that rear COBRA spoiler. We also have the COBRA badge on the rear hatch here, and the lights that came on the 1993 COBRA. They're actually spec'd straight off of a 1983 SVO, and if you actually look at the date code, I don't know if you can see that there, it says 83 right on them. So they're straight off an 83 SVO. The last thing that's different would be the rear bumper cover. It's not a GT and it's not quite an LX bumper. The GT bumper covers the exhaust and you don't have any exposed tips. The LX bumper takes a different angle and ends up a lot higher. So the COBRA is a little bit in between both and still has the exposed stainless steel tips. There is one thing different with the interior, not necessarily different, but one thing that's not available is cruise control. The 93 COBRA did not have cruise control available, and the reason I was given, well, the cruise control would have went right in these spaces here in the steering wheel and pretty much filled up those openings. And since this car was intended for track use, they wanted to free up the steering wheel as much as they could, so no cruise control was available on a COBRA. And one other side note, one thing that I've noticed, I've been in many other Mustangs, especially from 90 to 93, and they've all had a fuel light. So when you got down to real low on fuel, a little light would come on. And especially like now, where I'm in, there'd be a little light down there. Well, this COBRA, I don't know if it's the only one or something's not functional. I don't have a fuel light. It just runs out of gas. Having ran out of gas a couple times in the car, I can definitely tell you that there's no fuel light. I don't know if that has to do with the fact that it has a slightly different fuel pump, but just one other thing I've noticed that's different. Other than that, the interior is identical to any other Mustang. Well, there you have the outside differences of the 93 COBRA. Let's go ahead and check out the performance upgrades. Now I want to point out all the performance upgrades that came on the 1993 Ford Mustang COBRA. Starting off, it had a larger mass airflow sensor. Now this unit is not the stock one that came with the Cobra. I have since upgraded it to an even larger unit by C&L, but the original unit is larger than the stock Mustang. Moving further, it has a larger throttle body, and of course it has the Cobra style GT40 intake. Now go along with that, it also has 24 pound-an-hour fuel injectors. So you can see they got the blue fuel injectors, which are the 24 pound-an-hour ones. It also has a higher rate fuel pump to go along with those fuel injectors. And of course has GT40 heads. They are cast iron heads, but they do have larger intake and exhaust valves, and they definitely flow a lot more air than the standard 5-liter Mustang. And those heads are also equipped with Crane 1.7 roller rockers, and to go along with those roller rockers, the Cobra also has an updated cam, very similar to the E303 cam. It's also equipped with hyper-eutectic pistons, which is stronger than cast aluminum, and they allow for a lower coefficient of thermal expansion, which allows for tighter tolerances. And I can tell you one thing about the Cobra, and I'm assuming it has to do probably with the cam and the pistons, but this definitely has more revs than a standard 5-liter. Even though it shares the same tach and it shows a red line of roughly 5,800 RPMs, this Cobra motor builds power beyond that. So it has probably about another 800 RPMs of over rev. And I believe that has to do with the lighter weight pistons. It also is equipped with underdrive pulleys to help reduce some of the parasitic drag created by the accessories. All these performance upgrades means that the car produces more torque. So to accommodate that, Ford put in the second generation of world-class T5 transmission, which has a higher torque rating of 310 foot-pounds of torque. And it does come with 4-wheel disc brakes as well, so that means the brake booster over there on the other side is upgraded as well to handle the 4-wheel disc. Now for the suspension, it's pretty much stock. Up front we have the stock size sway bar, but it does have polyurethane sway bar end link mounts. And in the rear it does have a larger sway bar and a softer spring rate. Ford found out that softening the rear end gave it more grip in the corners. So this car definitely pulls more G's than a standard Mustang. Now that's it for all the performance upgrades on the 93 Mustang Cobra. Now let me show you what all those parts equate to in performance numbers. Well, here I put together a little chart on the whiteboard to show you guys the listed horsepower numbers. So as you can see, in 1992, the 5-liter Mustang was rated at 225 horsepower and 300 foot-pounds of torque. Now in 1993, as you can see, it dropped down to 205 horsepower and 275 foot-pounds of torque. Now there's nothing different about the cars. They're pretty much mechanically almost identical. The decrease in horsepower was actually due to a revision Ford made in its engine testing procedures that caused the numbers to come out lower. Now back in 1993, it was hard to get insurance for a 5-liter Mustang. They kind of had a notorious reputation for wrapping themselves around telephone poles. So insurance premiums were really high on a 5-liter Mustang. So with the 1993 Cobra model coming out, Ford was a little leery about having a Cobra model and also having a car with close to 300 horsepower. So they used some different testing procedures when testing the engine's output that produced these lower numbers. That doesn't mean that the car made less horsepower. It's just the way that they represented the horsepower rating. So that carried over into the 93 Cobra. It's only rated at 235 horsepower and 280 foot-pounds of torque on paper. But just to give you a heads up, with all those additions that I showed you on the car, the mass airflow sensor, the larger throttle body, the GT40 Cobra style intake, the increased fuel injector size, the GT40 heads with larger intake and exhaust valves, the cam, the underdrive pulleys, all of those parts were offered in Ford's SVO catalog as a performance upgrade package for your 5-liter Fox body Mustang. And Ford advertised that package would increase horsepower by at least 90 horsepower and about 50 foot-pounds of torque. Well, if that's all the parts that came on the 93 Cobra, and Ford's advertising that it'll boost your 5-liter by 90 horsepower, then shouldn't the Cobra have 90 more horsepower? it has all those same parts, so one would think that those are the numbers that the Cobra should have. But no, Ford stuck with the low numbers of 235 and 280. So if you take the numbers from the Ford SVO performance catalog and add it to the horsepower numbers for the 93 5-liter, so like I said, it comes stated as 205 horsepower and 275 foot-pounds of torque. But that package claims that it adds 90 horsepower and 50 foot-pounds of torque. You take that and add it to the standard 5-liter, and that would put the Cobra's output at 295 horsepower and 325 foot-pounds of torque. And I feel that's a more accurate real-world number of what the 93 Mustang Cobra actually produces. If you remember, I said it has a different generation of T5 world-class transmission where they bumped the torque rating up to 310. Well, they wouldn't have done that if the car was only rated at 280 foot-pounds of torque. So I have an old Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords magazine here where they took a 93 Mustang and had very similar bolt-on modifications to what come on the Cobra. And they did dyno runs. So a typical engine bolt-on, so it included some trick flow heads, GT40 intake, an E303 cam, larger throttle body, larger mass airflow sensor, 30-pound injectors, and shorty headers. So similar mods to what the 93 Cobra comes with, and they were able to produce on the dyno 257 horsepower at the wheels and 301 foot-pounds of torque at the wheels. Now if you do the 15% correction for drivetrain loss, that comes out to 295 horsepower and 346 foot-pounds of torque. That's very close to the estimates what Ford says that performance upgrade kit should add to a 5-liter Mustang. 295 and 325. Now of course we got a little bit more torque over here. I assume that has to do with the fact that we added headers to it, and it had a little bit more fuel. It had 30 pound-an-hour injectors instead of 24. So that would accommodate for the larger torque figures. But we're still coming out to very similar numbers based on all those performance upgrades that the 93 Cobra comes with. So in my opinion, the real world numbers on the 93 Mustang Cobra is more akin to right here. So you're looking at a car that produces 295 horsepower and close to 325 foot-pounds of torque. And that's why I refer to the 93 Cobra, especially my car, as a torque monster. It has more torque than horsepower, and for a car that weighs barely over 3,000 pounds, as soon as you get on the throttle in this thing, it immediately goes sideways. Now I've been driving the car for over 26 years, so I know how to control that. But back in the day, if you weren't used to that, it was very common for a lot of people to wrap their Mustangs around telephone poles. In fact, I had a friend that did it to, what was it, like a 3-month-old Mustang GT with an automatic. And that back end came around him, and he split the car in half on a telephone pole. Luckily he survived, but he did sustain some pretty serious injuries. So that would explain why the insurance companies were pretty reluctant to give a policy for a 5-liter Mustang. And that led Ford, prior to the release of the Cobra model, to play with those horsepower numbers. But that's how I remember it back in the day. That's how it was presented to me by Ford. These horsepower numbers are not accurate. We're talking more around the 295 and about 325 foot-pounds of torque. So I hope that explains the discrepancy in the publicized horsepower and torque numbers for the 93 Cobra versus actual real-world numbers. If anyone doubts those numbers and seems to think that I'm just making this stuff up, I'll gladly run this car against anything you got to prove the fact that it's much quicker than the internet might tell you that it is. Well, there you have the complete rundown of all the differences between the 1993 Ford Mustang Cobra and a regular 5-liter Mustang. And I've also explained why the publicized horsepower numbers from the 93 Mustang and Cobra are artificially low. They just don't represent the power that these cars produce. Thank you so much for watching my video. I hope you found the information useful and informative. And once again, don't forget to browse my channel for my other content, and please smash that subscribe button. Thanks again for watching.